Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Schoolscape online webinar. As mentioned, the purpose of these webinars is to really help you school online. And in studio with me today, I've got the team from Digicape. So I've got Alan and Paul. And I think when it comes to an expert around Apple, these are the people to talk to. So they are literally working with close on 100 schools at the moment. They've been helping schools. They know what you are facing. And today they're just going to help us understand a little bit more about how Apple works, how it will be relevant for your school, and if it's the right choice for you. Also, if you are presently using Apple, it will give you a good idea of the full potential of what your system has. So on your right of your screen, you'll see there's a chat function. There's also questions. If you have any questions, we're going to leave 10 minutes open at the end for questions. And then there is also a poll section. So we're going to put in a couple of polls. The first one I am going to publish now quickly, and that's just quickly to see how many of you presently have Apple devices. So the poll should be live there if you want to fill that in. But enough about me talking. Alan, Paul, thank you. Really appreciate you coming online with us. I'm going to jump straight into the first question. So, Alan, to start with you, and I think this is the most relevant question, how does Apple support home learning?
That's a very big question. I think Apple's been in education for over 40 years, and it supports learning, not necessarily home learning. I think in the context of what we're talking about now, we're talking about distance learning, the ability for school to continue and so on. Now, it's possible to create a traditional school environment with technology, but one of the questions you have to ask is the traditional school environment something that really needs replicating, and is it the most effective way of handling an online or a distance learning scenario? And I think Paul will talk to that a little bit later. Apple has a rich history in education and in schools. Steve Jobs once said that Apple exists at the intersection of the liberal arts and technology. It's not just a hardware company. It's like most of the other services out there, Google, Microsoft, it's fully integrated into the internet. So your location is actually less important than the kind of learning that you actually want to take place. Apple's devices are ideally placed to nurture creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration, whether you're in the same location or remote. We've got to remember that distance learning isn't something new. The School of the Air was founded in Australia in the 1950s. UNISA has been around for a long time. It's really, the question is, what type of learning do we want to do, and what does this opportunity facilitate?
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I think what leads on with that, if we can now kind of get maybe a bit more into the details. So what is Apple School Manager?
So Apple School Manager is an online service or a portal that lets you purchase content in bulk. It lets you configure what we call automatic device enrollment. It connects to a mobile device management system. It lets you create accounts for your students and for your staff. It lets you configure your infrastructure. And in a nutshell, it assists you with the deploying of devices without an IT person ever having to lay a hand on a device. So it's kind of the management portal that allows you to set up your infrastructure, which is then connected to a mobile device management system, which you then use to manage your devices.
Okay, wow, that's pretty powerful. And I think what would then lead on, and maybe we can throw this question out to Paul. Paul, for you, with this tool, with what's kind of been faced at the moment with schools moving online, how does a teacher actually manage a digital classroom when it comes to the learners, when it comes to the workload? If you could just dive into that for a bit.
Sure, thanks, Peter. I think that's to manage their digital classroom or the ongoing facilitation of learning. Teachers are going to need to use a variety of tools, and they're not always going to be Apple tools. Even if they are third-party tools, they'll work great on Apple hardware, so there's no problem with that. Okay. I think everything going forward is going to be using some kind of learning management system, whether you're using Apple Schoolwork or whether you're using Google Classroom. Whatever tool you choose for this, you need to have a flow of work between the teachers and the students where everything's going to be in one place. For actual lessons, I think we're going to need to find a blend between live teaching and students learning at different times when they have access to the computer or the phone or the data.
Yes.
Lessons can easily be shared live. Apple have tools like FaceTime that you can use for group discussion, or Google Meets. Teachers can also record those for later viewing. They can use screen recording software. You can even use an app like Zoom to record your screen. Once you've got a video, you can post it through your learning management system, but you can also use tools like Edpuzzle to start making them interactive. So you can force your kids to interact with the video, posing questions, prompting them at different times in the videos. Video is going to take place of many things. Teachers obviously don't necessarily have all the time in the world to make video resources, but there are existing resources like Khan Academy or Crash Course or other teachers' videos. Teachers will just need to curate them beforehand to make sure that they're good quality. The classroom when you teach is kind of like a magical place, and I really think we're going to lose that with everything going online. And when you have those impromptu class discussions and people sharing and people building on other people's ideas, that's what you lose when we're in isolation. So using collaborative tools, Padlet or the Google Groups or collaborative documents, teachers can facilitate text-based discussion if they don't have access to have everybody be online with video like this at the same time, because bandwidth is definitely going to be an issue for many of our people. And then I think the student experience of their learning is going to be very different at home. And depending where your school is right now, most of our schools are on holiday at the moment. When the term really starts, I think a lot of people are going to become aware of how much work teachers put in every day for encouragement and motivation and just working with students. So using the video tools, similar to what we mentioned before, teachers are going to need to build in time to actually interact with their students one-on-one, have a video conversation, find out where people are, keep the human factor going.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to
So,
interrupt.
sorry. So just one of the things that we always look for as teachers is how we assess the work. And there are so many brilliant assessment platforms online, but I think that's blown out the water because we just can't be sure that students are not teaching. So instead of cramming and regurgitating things on tests, I think we should rather look at designing tasks where students can be creative and be forced to put their own ideas down. Yes. And to really engage with the work.
And I think that's more close to what happens in the real world. In the real world, you don't.
Absolutely.
You'll always have your textbook next to me. So just a follow-up question with that, Paul. You mentioned there's a lot of these tools built directly into the software that Apple provides, or are there add-ons? How would a teacher get these extra tools that you've spoken about?
Many of the tools are third-party tools. So you'll see that, the Google Suite for Education, as one example, has many tools, specifically with assessment. You've got something like GoFormative or something like Padlet. These can all be used in the internet browser. Okay. So it's actually hardware agnostic to a large extent. You can log on with anything that's got a decent browser interface. But then what you'll have found is that so many of those platform developers have built apps for both Apple and for other manufacturers. So you can get the best experience by downloading the app from the App Store and then interacting through that way.
Awesome. I think what would lead on, and maybe it's a question, Alan, for you, we've spoken about a lot of other kind of platforms. We've spoken about Apple, Microsoft, all of these other apps. How does Apple hardware and software work with these other tools that are available that schools might be using or looking to use?
That's a good question. From a hardware perspective, Apple, with the exception of the Lightning cable, which irritated a lot of people but led to a lot of advances, Apple
Yes.
follows standards. So currently, the USB-C cable is what Apple uses for almost everything it makes, with the exception of the current iPhones. And it is a standards-based device. So from a hardware perspective, it's very compliant. HDMI, headphone jacks for devices that still support headphone jacks. From a software perspective, Apple has always had to fit in. a lot of people also don't know that when Microsoft first started, in its first 5 years, 50% of its revenue came from making Macintosh application software. And
Wow.
the first graphic versions, graphic user interface versions of Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Excel were all created on the Mac before Windows. So Apple has a very rich history of third-party platforms. So the Microsoft suite of software is available both on Mac and iPad OS. The iPad software for Microsoft is absolutely stunning, almost full parity with the desktop version. And as is the Google suite, Google do provide applications, the Google Sheets, Google Docs, and so on are available both on Mac and in the browser, as one would expect, but also on iPad OS. Although the iPad OS versions aren't as good, I would say, as the browser experience. But having said that, with the release of iPad OS last September, the browser that you get on an iPad is a fully fledged web browser. So you can log on to docs.google.com or wherever you're going to Google, and you've got the full Google experience, add a keyboard and so on. You know, if you buy an Apple platform, it supports Microsoft and Google out the box. I don't think you can say the same thing for a Chromebook or a Windows environment. It doesn't support Apple out the box. So if you want the best Chromebook out there, get yourself an iPad Pro with a keyboard.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I think that's interesting, because I think what I'm picking up is Apple's actually a fantastic tool to use across multiple other platforms, Microsoft, Google. It enables you to do both very, very easily. And then I think what would lead on a question for that, and maybe I'm going to direct this to Paul. Walk me through, you're a teacher and you now are wanting to firstly onboard yourself, and then you want to onboard your learners. How easy and how do you physically roll out your solution to a school or to your learners? Sorry.
I think we're just going to make a big assumption that the teacher, me in question, is we've got some direction from management about which tool we're using, and everyone's on board as a school that we're going forward with the same product, at least on a grade by grade basis. We definitely don't want to overwhelm either teachers or students, and remembering that, you know, tech support remotely is much more difficult than doing it face to face. So when we're looking at any particular app or platform, whatever it may be, the chances are that the developers have already built a video or a series of videos detailing training, both from a student or a teacher perspective. And so you can, in your learning management system, you can assign that to students, and you can work with them initially in smaller groups to onboard them. With the screen sharing software that we have, it's possible for the teacher to demonstrate things to the student, or to have one of the students share their screen and demonstrate that to the other students. And then from what I've been seeing with onboarding teachers, it's a case of putting the information out there, whether you're creating videos for your teachers by yourself, or whether you're using ones that are already available online, and then just touching base with everyone, giving them a phone call, sending them a message, just making sure that everyone's coping. And if we replicate that model to the students, whether you're going to do that for your homeroom or your tutor group or subject specific, I think that's going to be the way forward. And as Richard has said in the chat, the screen recording tools for iPad are built in. So anything that you want to demonstrate, whether it's how to use the actual device itself or any of the tools on the device, you know, anyone with an iPad can make that screen recording and then share it however you normally share your work.
Okay. I see we've got Richard from, I think it's, is it the Redham? I can't actually see the school name here, but
It's
Richard
Parklands
says,
College.
No, Richard would be from
Sorry,
Parklands.
yes, sorry, my apologies there. I see it is Parklands. He says there are great screen recording tools
Hello,
built
Richard.
in, especially on iPad. So I think that ties in with that point. Alan, just to flip a question to you, and I think this ties on, teachers need resources. They need content. So Alan, does Apple provide learning content, books, apps, what is available, what can they tap into? I know we've briefly mentioned it. What is available to the teachers?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you here slightly because, we have the curriculum. We know what is supposed to be taught. Apple provides tools, and it provides access to learning how to use those tools. And the tools themselves are very, very simple to use. If we're going to transition to a modern education system, the focus needs to be not so much on empowering the teacher, but in empowering the student. So, somebody once said to me, if you walk out of a class and the person who walks out of the class who is the most tired is the teacher, then the wrong person's doing the work.
Sure.
I think what Apple does provide is a raft of ideas of how to use technology in support of teaching and learning. It's not supporting technology to continue this continuum that we've got of the sage on the stage, of the teacher as the font of all knowledge, dispensing wisdom to the students, which are then tested via a text-based test. We're using technology to enable kids who are not necessarily good at writing, but are great orally. We're trying to develop the innate talents that are required to be an individual and to succeed in the 21st century. So to that end, if you go to the iBook store and you search for Apple Teacher, you will find hundreds of books that will show you how to use the software, how to use the hardware to empower both yourself and the students in using these devices in support of teaching and learning. There's also the Apple Teacher program, which is teacher.apple.com, where you can log in and you can learn how to use the software and the hardware in short snippets and do tests and earn badges. If you're on Twitter, you can join the ADE chats. There are curated, if you go to the App Store, there are curated education apps. And if you're a school that has kids which have special needs, you can search for accessibility. So all of these tools are available, and just if you look at Apple's primary apps, Richard mentioned earlier that the iPad has great screen recording tools. Every one of the productivity suites that Apple has, Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, which is the Word, Excel, and PowerPoint of the Apple world, have the ability to record audio directly into the application, to record video directly into the application, so that the content that you can create is incredibly rich and allows you to personalize and differentiate the learning just by using the tools. And you don't have to spend all that much time learning the technology because the technology is easy to use. You just get on and work with the projects that you have to work with and so on. Using this type of software enables you to express yourself to the fullest extent and doesn't limit you in perhaps a more narrow sphere that our current education system provides.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Alan, if a school chooses to use Apple hardware, software, I think mostly importantly around hardware, how do you support the school and the parents? How does that purchasing process work? How do you support them?
Well, ideally, we want the school to purchase the devices. Whoever purchases it, whether it's the student or whether it's the teacher or the parent, ultimately the parent's paying for it. They're either paying for it in school fees or they're paying for it in taxes. The issue we have, though, is that if the school purchased the devices, the amount of management that is able to be done to the devices, either remotely or directly, just scales up hugely. So if the school purchased the devices, it becomes possible, much easier to deploy the devices, to enroll them, to distribute apps automatically, rather than the parent owning the devices. So we would recommend that a school looks at bulk purchases. You have uniformity across the board of the devices. You don't have 5 people with a device that doesn't have enough RAM. You don't have 5 people who have a device that doesn't have a camera. I think one of the things that most teachers would like and expect when they are standing in front of a class is predictability. And that's one of the dangers of a BYOD system, is that if you've got 25 kids in front of you with 25 different devices, you don't necessarily have the ability to predict what's going to come back at you when you've asked the kids to do some work. And then it becomes a technical issue, not a learning issue anymore. What we're trying to, if all we're trying to do is set up a system where we're giving the kids devices that we can distribute textbooks to, it's probably cheaper to stay with a textbook. You don't have to charge it, and it doesn't break quite as much when you drop it.
I like that. Alan, thanks for that. We're going to flip across to some of the questions that have come in. So if there are any other live questions just under the questions tab, please pop them. And I think the first question actually ties in perfectly with what you've been talking about now. And I think it's going to be a lot easier if the school manages the devices and purchases them directly, and that is security. So, Alan, or Paul, what security options are available for Apple? Secure remote access, endpoint security, native VPN capabilities. This is all specifically around cyber threats. What are the options? What is available?
Can I take that, Paul?
Yes.
I think Apple stands or falls. They've made a stand when it comes to privacy and security. It's a hugely important thing for them. They've stood up against the American government. They stood up against the FBI. Your data is your data. And every single iPad and almost every single Mac now has built in as part of it what is a security chip, an encryption chip that encrypts all your data on the fly. So if somebody steals your device, you can send a remote command to it to lock it. And really, one of the things it does is it removes that encryption key. So even somebody takes a hard drive out of the device, they can't get access to your data. When you enroll your devices into a mobile device management system, Apple have built the iPad and more recently the Mac to be able to accept tiny, tiny little text documents, little XML files, mobile config files that your mobile device management system will use to configure that device. Amongst those things are VPN setups. So if you've got 100 devices that are rolled into your MDM and you want to configure the MDM on those, the VPN on those devices, your administrator sets up the configuration, they push that configuration to the end user, and then all of a sudden those devices are configured. It doesn't mean somebody has to go from machine to machine to machine to machine to set them up. So security is huge from Apple's perspective, and I think it's evidenced in just about everything that you see with the devices.
Wow. So I think there's definite value from a school point of view, managing the devices and rolling it out to parents. The control sounds like Apple has got a lot of functionality built in for that. So thank you for that. Another question that came in from Richard, thank you, Richard, says, can Apple schoolwork be used in distance learning?
Yeah, it can definitely be used.
It can.
Sure. Apple Schoolwork is a method for teachers to create assignments for their classes. It works very similarly to Google Classroom. You're allowed to post work in there, and that gets distributed to your students. They see when the due dates are, and then they can submit either the work that you sent them back, or they can upload additional documents that they've created from scratch if you haven't necessarily specified what form the work needs to take. And that goes basically through the magic of the internet. So wherever you are, it is possible to facilitate that if you would like to use Apple Schoolwork.
Okay, brilliant. Sandy asks, is it possible to get a list of the tools mentioned? I think what we can do post this is just post a couple of those into the chat functionality. Paul, if that's all right for you.
Sure.
And then, sorry, if there are any more questions, please, to any of the users.
We'll build a document as well.
Please, that would be great.
We can build a document as well that if people are interested, they can post the email address and we can reach out to them.
Okay. And then Sandy asks just a further question on the Apple School Manager. Can Apple School Manager work be accessed on Microsoft devices?
No. The Schoolwork app is an iPad only app at this point. So that's the limitation.
Okay, so would I be correct in saying the Apple Schoolwork would need to be, if a school is in a place that all the parents are on, all the pupils are on Apple devices, it would work in that environment.
And just to link that back to what Alan was saying earlier, if you've got an Apple device, you can run Apple software, you can run Google software, you can run Microsoft software. If you have a non-Apple device, I'm sure you can do quite a bit with it, but you can't run Apple software. So you immediately exclude yourself from that.
Okay. And then one further question here.
And I think one of the issues about that, can I just expand on that as well? And it relates to the earlier question about the VPN. Much of what Apple is doing is built into the operating system. So if you want to use schoolwork, for example, if you want to use Apple Classroom, you don't necessarily have to install any additional software onto the iPad. It is just enabled by the fact that the teacher is distributing software. I'll give you an example. If you're using Pages to write a report and a teacher distributes a piece of a project, a template, maybe a worksheet to you that you have to work on, if you're familiar with the iPad, you'll know in the top right-hand corner, you've got your share sheet. And typically for somebody to do the work and submit, they'd have to go to the share sheet, choose who they want to share it with. But if you have a document that's been distributed by Schoolwork, it automatically adds a button called Submit. And that's all the end user have to do. They tap the Submit button. It takes their document. It appends their name to the beginning of the document. So the teacher doesn't have to end up with a folder full of 30 documents all with the same name. They know exactly who did the work. So the fact that Apple has built all of this infrastructure into the operating system means that every application that chooses to take advantage of this can without very little extra work.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's interesting. One of the comments that we just had came in was they said from multiple personal encounters, if an iOS device is set up correctly and synced via iCloud to the relevant Apple ID, the security and control surpasses most other mobile devices. And I think that's really relevant. You know, we're in a place where pupils are bringing devices into a network that you have no control over them. So it's great seeing just comments coming in from that. We've had another question. It says, tell us about iTunes U.
Oh, I'd love to tell you about iTunes U. iTunes U is the most fantastic application. It's an application and an online portal where somebody could create courses. Individuals could create courses. You can go onto iTunes U, and if you're a plumber and you want to get people to learn how to do plumbing, you can, via the browser, create a course, create lesson plans, create activities, and then distribute them and communicate with people. If you're an institution, you can do that as well. The limitations, if you're an individual, is, if I remember right, you can have 50 students and you have about 2 gigabytes of storage, and you can do about 20 courses. If you're an educational institution, it's all unlimited. The issue with iTunes U, sadly, was it came out and it was designed for universities and high schools. And a lot of the people we had who were using Macs and iPads were primary schools. So the interface was considered a little bit too cerebral and a little bit too formal for use in the classroom, but it is just the most stunning application. It really is fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you. Just for all the viewers that are there, we're just going to publish a quick poll. If you would like Digicape to contact you to give you more info on Apple solutions, if maybe you have solutions that you want better use out of, or you are thinking of going the route of solutions, please pop on that and we will pass your details across. So I think we coming to a close. Maybe Paul, if you would just like to give us your last thoughts on why you think, you know, Apple and your software is a great solution. Maybe we could end with that.
Sure. I think that the two main reasons for me that come to mind, it's just literally the awesomeness of the hardware. It's so secure, it's so reliable, it's so easy to use. That's the first thing. And then the software that lies on top of it, as we've mentioned before, all the options are open to you when you're running Apple hardware. And the built-in tools that you get for free with the device, Pages, Keynote, Numbers, Clips, iMovie, GarageBand, they allow for so many avenues of creativity, and they allow students to express themselves in so many ways that really put the work in the students' hands. And I think leveraging that is the way that we're going to build a future that's going to be innovative and fun to be in.
Brilliant. Paul and Alan, thank you. I appreciate your time. We wanted to keep to 30 minutes out of respect for the viewers that are listening. So thank you. I'm just going to do a quick punt for Digicape. If you would like to check out Digicape, have a look at their reviews on School Advisor. I've just popped the link out now. You can actually hear what the other schools. We've interviewed Digicape and asked them to come on for this just because we really back them as a company that can support you and look after you. So Paul, Alan, thank you for taking the time to listen to us. To all of the viewers, we appreciate you logging in. We'll send you a link post this where you can view the webinar on demand and pass to anyone that it might be relevant to. So thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody who joined us.